Welcome to My Morning Cup, a podcast produced by Costa Media Advisors and brought to you by the generous support of the Tennessee Valley Authority. To learn more about TVA's impact on our community, follow TVA on Instagram at TVA and on Twitter X at TVA News. My Morning Cup, where we have interesting conversations with genuine people. I'm Mike Costa, your host. My guest this week is Tasia Malakasis. Tasia is the CEO of the Company Lab, or CoLab as it has become known. Tasia joined CoLab after years in high-growth tech companies and then leading and scaling her own consumer packaged good company, Belle Chevre Goat Cheese. Tasia, welcome to My Morning Cup. Before I ask how you discovered goat cheese produced in Alabama while in New York City, let me ask, what's in your morning cup?
What's in my morning cup is some really good coffee that you made for me. So thank you very much.
Well, you got to love Keurig.
Have to love it.
Is that your typical just black coffee?
I do a lot of cream at home, and I'll froth my milk when I do it at home. But I'm not picky.
How many cups you have at home?
I don't know that I even finish a cup at home.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
How about at the office? Do you have a few there?
I have about a half a cup. I can't quite make it through it and it stay warm. And I've looked into those little heater things. But no.
Do you have to have it to get going in the morning?
No, I really feel like it's a habit. It's just the thing that felt like when you're an adult, you need to drink coffee. Yeah. And so I do it, and it's a habit. And I don't think I have to have it. It's the same thing. I start my day with a cup of coffee and end my day with a cocktail, and it feels like I'm adulting.
I like that. Bookends.
Yeah.
I switched to decaf some years ago, and I kind of understand that you feel like you have to do it because it's a ritual thing for me. You know, just
you wake up,
smell, and sit, relax, and enjoy.
I don't even really like it. But it does feel like it's a habit. And I think, why do I drink this? But because it's a ritual.
Well, welcome to My Morning Cup and welcome to Chattanooga. How many years has it been now? 2?
I've been at CoLab for 2 years in July. Yeah. So about almost 3 in Chattanooga.
Oh, well, good.
Yeah. The end of 2021.
Well, welcome. And Chattanooga and your hometown have a lot of things in common. Huntsville has similar size, but I think for years kind of had the happening high-tech edge on Chattanooga. Would that be fair to say?
Well, here's what I think about Huntsville. We're really smart. I mean, it's a very smart community. You have every other person is a rocket scientist or literally or designing missiles. So big space and defense. But so we're not a lot of fun though. So when I came to Chattanooga, and honestly, Mike, I didn't realize much about Chattanooga. It was the city that I drove through to get to Atlanta. Yeah. And I didn't really stop. And so I started dating my now husband, and he's from here. And I was just really surprised by Chattanooga. And then when we lived here, I'm like, there's the intentionality behind like art and culture and music that's here I found that to be fascinating because we're not very arty or culturally minded. And that's not entirely true of all of Huntsville, but in general in Huntsville and on the food scene. So engineers love a value. So we have lots of chains in Huntsville, and you've got a pretty cool food scene here. Yeah. I say Chattanooga has. And so I was just really, really surprised by that. And we live on the south side. The other thing that was really surprising is that it's, for a small city, it has this really cool urban feel. Like I can walk almost everywhere, and I do. Like I don't even need my car. I mean, on the occasion, but I really love that about Chattanooga.
It's become much more pedestrian friendly. And to your point on the food, when I first got here in 2000, you would get the best of the best things in the paper, and the best pizza was Pizza Hut. The best Italian was Olive Garden. And fortunately, over the last 15 years in particular, if not a little bit more, it's really been an explosion of a great food scene.
Yeah.
Back to Huntsville. One thing, I heard a stat the other day, or a couple of weeks ago actually. Huntsville is now the largest city in the state of Alabama.
I have heard that they're on their way. Did they make it?
I believe they have.
The largest
in terms of the
Birmingham?
city itself, not the MSA.
Yeah. Yeah, well, there's just so much growth. And it's so funny, Mike, because right when I left Huntsville, it got the U.S. News and World Report's best city in America to live in. I'm like, I thought, great, right?
I'm leaving.
It's because I left. Or I did my work and now it's time for me to go. Just kidding.
You can go with the latter.
I like that one better, too.
So were you born and raised there?
I wasn't born there. My father was finishing his PhD in Cincinnati, so I was born there and then came back to North Alabama, which is where my mother's from. And my father's from Greece. And so my parents divorced when I was young, and he moved back to Greece. So most of my young adult life, then I, spent going some back and forth to Greece, but have always lived in Huntsville, other than not being born there.
So what was the impact of a town like Huntsville, where there's probably more PhDs per capita than any other city in the United States, and such a focus on the defense industry and NASA and everything else? Was that something that in the high schools in Huntsville that is very what's the word I'm looking for? Not apparent, but that they really focused on?
I think, I don't know that, let's just say when I was entering high school in 1984, there was focus on it, but you just had, because everyone's parents were in the industry and in some level, you just had smarter kids, right? Like the high schools and you think about this, like in North Alabama having really good public schools, that's kind of an anomaly, right? So math and science were very heavy. And I think as things progressed, then there was more intentionality behind what was offered in the schools. But I went to Virgil I. Grissom High School. All the public schools were named after some of the former astronauts. And so there really were a lot of smart kids. And I think it's just genetics too, right? And exposure. And the exposure too, because you had people from Huntsville. It was rare to be a native Huntsvillian. Yeah. You had people from all over the world. And then I went to University of Alabama in Huntsville. And it's so funny because when, these stereotypes that Alabama has, we're still stuck in 1964 from our terrible civil rights movement and all the things that happened. And so I remember having a professor in college who moved from Seattle, and she came down and she said all of her friends were saying, "You can't move to Alabama. Are you kidding me?" Like they still let their kids out to harvest the crops. And I'm like, this was in the 90s that people were still, still had this perception. So when I grew up in Alabama, and all I could wait to do was leave, right? Like I needed to hurry and get out. And so I started my career in New York and in the Northeast, and I'd say I was from Alabama, and they'd look and make sure I still had shoes on or, a hat on my teeth. I'm being a little facetious, but it was not, the whole world didn't really know what we were doing in Huntsville and what was there. When
I first came to town in the early 2000s, I did an inner city visit with the Chamber of Commerce. We went to Huntsville. They take you to NASA and you do all those things. And it was interesting. We were talking about economic development. And I forget who it was from Huntsville. I don't think it was someone from the chamber, but it was someone involved with economic development, said, our biggest challenge in Huntsville is our last name, Alabama.
Yeah. And it's still that way today. I mean, I had some neighbors, they didn't come down for the space industry, but they moved from New Jersey. He was a ER doc and she was a pharmacist. And he had an opportunity to start a new business in Huntsville. And she told me, she came down crying. She's like, we'll do it for 1 year, but I'm not going to stay. And now, and what happens is, and I'm sure this happens in Chattanooga, they will never leave.
Yeah.
So when people would come, they would come with tears in their eyes or, just this is a temporary thing. I'm going to get in and I'm going to get out. And they end up staying for life because it is a very wonderful place to raise a family and an easy and affordable place to get really good education for your children. So, but I would say though that a lot of those kids are going to go. It's changing, but it's not a fun city like Chattanooga.
So with growing up for you in your varied background, being an entrepreneur and also being involved in media early, was that something culturally that you picked up on, or just something yourself that you said, these are the things that interest me?
So I describe my life and my career as a happy accident. So all of my twists and turns were accidental. So I studied literature at an engineering school, right? And I just did that because that's what I enjoyed and that's what I wanted to do. And in an engineering school, you might imagine, I got a ton of flack for that.
Oh, I bet.
What the hell are you going to do with an English degree? And I said, well, whatever I want to do. So I didn't know what I wanted to do was eventually be a cheesemaker or to be in media tech, but that's where I ended up. So I ended up going to Atlanta because I was applying to Emory for grad school and ended up just getting a job. And my first job was in sales for a startup that was based on the internet, and how do you get eyeballs on the internet? And that snowballed. And it was just very high growth companies that we sold, and it had these, very fast trajectory to exit. And so I kind of got addicted to that, Mike. Like it was the energy of something new, right? The internet, the energy of a startup, which was fascinating and so much fun. You worked really hard, but there was something about the energy with that.
So how do you come out of school with a literature degree and get involved with an internet media company? Did you just answer an ad?
Yeah, it was a sales position. And all my jobs I'd had in college were in sales. So I'd work in the summer, but it was in retail. So I sold dresses at Parisians, which was the big store, sold makeup for Estee Lauder. And I thought,
that teaches you a lot of skills too.
Yeah, no, and I think sales is a great place to start your career. I mentioned to you earlier, I've got a son who's a college senior, and I think he's studying economics and psychology. I don't know what he'll do, but I think sales is a great place to start your career, and you can learn a lot. And you can look at trajectories of CEOs. There are CEOs that were former finance people, but a lot come from sales, and it's a mindset. So I think you can do anything with that. And so yeah, that was an accident. It was purely accidental, and I spent more than a decade in that field with some really great companies and some really great entrepreneurs, and then I had another happy accident.
Well, and I like the way you put that as happy accident, because what I've tried to do with this podcast is explain careers to a great degree are happy accidents, or those decisions that come your way that you're going to go one way or another. Can you kind of take us through your various happy accidents?
Yeah. So the first one, and I started in internet technologies and media tech, and then
let me ask a quick question on that. And I'm sorry to keep on interrupting you. So you just explain that a little bit of who you were selling to and the challenge of that sales job.
Yeah. So one of the last companies, I worked for DoubleClick, and that is a familiar name for a lot of people. They were acquired by Google for $3 billion. That was and I got to DoubleClick through an acquisition. That was email technology. So all these tech pieces that were trying to capture eyeballs that were online, right? So all of, we're moving away from newspapers and otherwise and going online. So how do you capture that audience? And so it's really the tech behind that. So I was in New York with DoubleClick and running a global team of sales engineers. And then Is
that an oxymoron? Sales engineers.
It is actually. It's not an easy thing to do. It's not but you still, in a technical field, you need an engineer sometimes to explain things. So trying to find a person who can speak English and is really technical. Yeah. And I don't mean from a language native. Yes, you get me.
Doesn't talk all technical.
Yeah. Or who can just understand other human beings in some cases. So I've always spent my life sort of between the market and then the engineer too, which was a lot of fun. But some alum of DoubleClick started another business, which was Rich Media Tech, which is the technology that allowed you to put video and ads, or dynamically create ads, and that was a big deal at the time. And so
a little bit ahead of its time too, wasn't it? People weren't ready for it.
They weren't ready for it, and that sort of gets to then that business we sold to Gannett, which is a newspaper company, and so trying then to capture the attention of newspaper salesmen to say, stop selling ads in your paper and start selling ads online. Yeah. And I was doing that for USA Today's president, going around the country talking to newspaper people and running my product team and running a marketing team and leading innovation meetings. And I just, after talking to and not getting any interest or any buy-in from the newspaper people, I said, I'm out.
Yeah,
it was time for an exit for me for that, and I did something, and that's when another happy accident comes along.
Well, and just to your point on the newspapers, that was probably what 05, 06 in that area, and traditional media companies were being I'm going to use the word forced because they were going to lose money if they didn't do it, to chase those internet dollars. Yeah. And you had a lot of traditional media salespeople who are looking at you like you got horns coming out of your head saying, what do you mean? My newspaper's going to get 1,000 more eyeballs than anything you're going to have there. And this order I'm working on is 10 times, 100 times what you're asking me to go out after. Yeah. It had to be hard to get their attention.
Yeah, it was hard to get their attention, Mike. And you summed that up very nicely because there was a lot of confusion. And you were saying being forced to go there. I'm showing up at the behest of their parent company, right? Yeah. And I'm the spokesperson for the internet, right?
Oh yeah.
And
you're
here
taking
comes
them
this,
down the path they don't want to go.
Yeah, and here comes this, person from headquarters and shimming in here and whatever and talking to me about this tech, and I'm like, I'm not going there. And at the time, the people I were talking to probably had 30 years on me, right? Yeah. And I probably was like that engineer who couldn't speak their language either. So it wasn't an easy ride.
Yeah. I bet it wasn't. Well, and having experienced that on the broadcast side, it wasn't a very easy ride on the other side.
No,
either.
I'm sure it wasn't. And so but if you think about like having spent my career working on, cutting edge tech and what's coming next, it was and being surrounded by people who couldn't get enough of that, then to go into a room where people were like, I like things the way they are, right?
Do you kind of see it as, I'm going to use this analogy, like you saw the meteor coming and you're telling the dinosaurs, it's coming, it's going to wipe us out.
Yeah.
And no one's listening to you.
No. And Mike, it wasn't that much past, I don't remember what year, like the San Francisco Chronicle shut down. I mean, like newspapers across the country
started folding.
They just shut down, right?
Yeah.
So Gannett had the vision to acquire the tech, right, to get them there, but they still lost newspapers.
Yeah.
So I mean, I don't know that I was coming in and saying, listen, dinosaurs, it's coming and you're going to die. But it's probably, that's probably accurate.
So the next happy accident, you leave Gannett. Is it the Culinary Institute?
Well, so actually, I went to the Culinary Institute on a sabbatical in between an exit before I got to Point Roll and Gannett. And I started with this class, Mike, and it was called Career Explorations. And it was at the CIA, Culinary Institute of America. And I'm in this course, it's a week-long course with all these disgruntled professionals, right? Like lawyers and brokers, and they're all just trying to figure out what do they do with this love that they have for food, which is exactly what I was trying to figure out. If I love something, shouldn't I be pursuing that passion? And can you have avocation and vocation commingled? And so that whet my appetite a little bit. And then I decided that I wanted to, so let me go back. So I'm in that class and I go into the city one day and I happen into a Dean and DeLuca, which at the time. I mean, they were sort of the preeminent gourmet grocery store. And I go just to go shopping there. And I'm looking at this whole cheese department, like thousands of cheeses. And I pick up this one cheese and on the label it said made in Elkmont, Alabama. So here's an Alabama girl in New York City, and I find this cheese that's made 30 miles from where I grew up. And I'm like, why did I have to go to New York City to find out about something that was made in my backyard? Then I did a bunch of research, and it was in the World Encyclopedia of Cheese, had won all these awards, and was in all the cachet cheese shops in the country. And I thought, Alabama's known for barbecue and boiled peanuts, not for artisan goat cheese. And I had a little bit of this like kind of home pride by seeing that there. And I didn't know it at the time, but that's eventually where I ended up. So I went back into tech. And actually, I'd spent some months more in culinary school, went and enrolled, but then I ended up going back into tech. The money was too good. Yeah. And what I realized from culinary school is I love food, but I don't want to be in the kitchen.
And that's hard work. I mean,
it's hard work.
Chefs, not even just chefs, line cooks down the line. It's
nights, weekends. And if you're lucky and you have a leading restaurant, then you're working even more, right? Yeah. So I ended up getting recruited back into the space. And then that's where I fast forward. I think I had mentioned this. I'm leading this 3-day innovation meeting with the USA Today team, and I quit right after that. And I called the owner of Belle Chevre and I said, I just quit my job and I'm coming home to make cheese. So I did. I went back home and I worked for her for free for 6 months.
Did you know her beforehand when you called?
I had called on her a couple of times, and I think she looked at me the same way that I was getting accustomed to looked at by the media people, like I had horns and like, what are you talking about? Like, so I just was so impressed with what she'd done and with the products, and I just wanted to know more. And at the time, I don't know that I knew that I was going to end up there. I was just intrigued.
I was going to ask that. Did you go in it with the intention of, I'm going to end up being a cheese artisan or maybe owning the company someday, or I just got to get out of what I'm doing? Like a better term, I'm going to take a sabbatical and do this for a while and see what I think.
Yes. So the first conversations, I had no idea. I really just wanted to know her and her story and know more about this business. And then I continued to call on her. And then when I quit, I'd sort of made up my mind, I'm going to go home and I'm going to do this. And I thought work there, right? And let me learn from her. So I was going to take those 6 months and learn. And then I decided that's my path. And then I worked out it was a good timing for her. Mm-hmm. She was in her 70s. She had sort of done this as a hobby, which is fascinating because she ended up with all of these literally hundreds of accolades for her cheese. So we made an offer and I acquired the business, and she stayed on for a while to help me to make sure I didn't mess things up. And so voila, I'm a cheesemaker.
How long had Belle Chevre been around? If she was 70,
Yeah, it was 1989.
Wow.
Yeah.
So it was an established high-end artisan cheese at that point.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, she was one of the grandmothers, if you will, of the American artisan cheese movement. So you think about like what happened with American wines. No one drank them, right? And then they did. Yeah. And now we make really great wines. And the same thing happened. America had a cheese culture of Depression cheese. Do you remember hearing about that? And then not artisan cheeses, Velveeta, right?
Kraft cheese slices.
Correct, yeah, and individually wrapped. And so then there was born this whole, like the beer, craft beer movement, the artisan cheeses. And so she was really one of those people who was responsible for that movement with a handful of other. And interestingly, now that I think about it and look back, most of them were women. Mm. And you think about like how some of that started. It's a very pastoral kind of thing, right? You've got milk. What do I do with it? So cheese is the destiny of milk, right? Or it's really just a preservation form. But so I went really deep into that and fell in love with it. And being a product person and being a marketer and being a salesperson, I thought, well, okay, I can bring this to market in a way that it's not been to market before. She was in the cheese shop in Beverly Hills and in Dina DeLuca in New York, but certainly not in Publix or Kroger, but we went there, and even Piggly Wiggly.
I love the pig. How did you utilize your past experiences and your CIA culinary experience in taking the cheese to the next level? What were some of the things you did?
Yeah, so that's a really fascinating question too, Mike, because when I got there, I thought, what have I done? I mean, like I've just thrown all of that knowledge and experience away, and that won't apply at all to this. And I was wrong, as I often am. So it all applied. I mean, every bit of it: how to sell, how to market, how to brand, how to create products for a modern consumer, right? So you're taking something that's almost ancient, right? Like this cheese. In fact, I think goat cheese was the first cheese, and that was an accident too, which I'd like to talk about. So, and then how do you make that more modern so that it can be approachable and easy? Artisan cheeses were intimidating, again, a lot like wines, and we didn't know how to say them. Chevre is a hard word to say, and what is a goat cheese and how do I use it? And it's not part of our, it's not part of our culture. My Greek history, feta is on the table at every meal, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, right? So we just didn't have that culture. So part of it was how do you create that, and how do you talk about something in a way that it's not been talked about before? Which, if you go back to the scenario we were exploring earlier, is how do I talk to people about something that's coming? It's the same thing, right? But I don't know that I was that successful with the newspapermen, but a little more successful with cheese eaters.
Did you, or how did you utilize your culinary experience, because I know you've written some cookbooks too.
Yeah.
Was the intention in getting involved with that first your love of cooking, or, gosh, I've got a goat cheese company. I gotta find some uses for it.
Yeah. Well, so food is still my passion, was then, still is. And so I'm very romantic about food, right? It's the one thing that I can do for you that not only can it be enjoyable, but it sustains your life, right?
Yeah.
Like that's a big deal. Like, I mean, I feel that deeply about it. So
food's love.
Food is love. Yeah. And so I'm in the space, I'm producing food, but I'm not in a kitchen, right? Like this was sort of a channel for me to get to the food world, but not have to do it in a traditional sort of chef form. And so in producing a product, and goat cheese is a pretty simple recipe. Like, we didn't monkey with that much. And I don't know that I went in to say, I want to change this cheese, but I do want to do some things with it that I think can be more applicable and more, again, easier for a larger audience. So the cookbooks, that was sort of accidental too. I'm actually in Birmingham, and I'm at an event for an author who's written a cookbook, and there are two publishers in the room who started talking to me, and they're like, "I love your story. We'd love to do a book with you." And that was the first book, Tasia's Table, Cooking with the Artisan Cheesemaker at Belle Chevre. So that happened sort of accidentally, but I thought that's great, because then I can disseminate some of this information about how you can use goat cheese in almost every meal. And I can tell you how, if you want to know.
I bet you could.
And then the next cookbook, which was published by Southern Living, they just had approached me and said, we'd love to do a book, and which was not about cheese at all, but coming from, recipes from a cheesemaker. So yeah, those were happy accidents as well.
Family recipes too.
Yeah, for sure. On the Greek side, and then on the Southern side from, my grandmother's. My grandmother really is the one who taught me that food is love. And so when I showed up at her house, there was a pot of chicken and dumplings on the stove, and they were for me, right? They were mine. And so after she died, I said, I'm never going to eat chicken and dumplings again. That's, that has too much, soul in that for me. And then really with this book, I said, okay, I'm going to recreate that recipe. And I shared that. So that was a big deal for me.
How long were you at Belle Chevre?
I bought the business in 2007 and sold in 2021.
Not too long ago, you just sold.
Yeah. So I timed my exit with my son's exit from the home. So empty nester, and I had always wanted to go and spend a year abroad. And so I was planning that and getting him off to school. And I was purposefully single while I was raising my son and building that business. And then I said, well, I guess it's okay for me to, now that he's going off to school, to open up that door again. And that's how I got to Chattanooga, actually. So married a Chattanoogan.
So you met a Chattanoogan, married a Chattanoogan, and when did you get here?
Well, we went abroad for the most of 2021. And then he actually came and said, yes, I will quit my job for a year and I will travel with you, which was,
great.
Yeah. So we did that. And then we came back. We were actually going to spend more time out, but we came back I sold my house in Huntsville, or was selling at the end of the year, and came back for the holidays and never went back.
And where did that year take you, and what did you learn?
Yeah. What a great question. It took me, I had to introduce Ethan to the Greeks. So
because you still have family in Greece.
Yeah, still have family there. I have two sisters that grew up with my father there, and my stepmother's there, and cousins and so forth. So we went to Greece. We spent a month in Istanbul, a month in Tuscany. We were in Spain and the French Alps, and Costa Rica, a little South America, but mostly Western Europe. And at the time, the world was just starting to wake up, right? And so the East was still closed, and we thought, okay, well, we'll come back home and then we'll go back out, but we didn't. And then I had another happy accident.
Before we get to that happy accident, why is travel so important?
I don't know, but I would say that food and travel are two of my love languages for sure. And I'm not sure where that came from, but I wanted to, it's so important to me. I wanted to instill that in my son. So every year for Christmas, I would give him a trip. He could take it in the next year, anywhere he wanted to go, as opposed to giving him a Xbox or
you gave him an experience.
And I wanted him to know the world. And the reason why is because I think if we don't, I'm sure, I can't remember the quote, but I think it's Mark Twain. It's like, if you want to know the world, then know your place. But it's just, I think you see everything differently when you can see that people make different choices in different places, and you have choices, and there's a lot of different ways to experience the world and people and food and culture. And so now when I travel, I don't go anywhere unless I like the food, right? So that dictates where I go to. But
were you an Anthony Bourdain fan?
Yes. Yeah.
I would bet, because it's a similar attitude about travel and food.
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, we were just in Cartagena, Colombia this summer, and there's a market that no tourist would ever go to, but I had read that he had been, and it was one of his favorite markets. And Mike, it's a sensory experience. I mean, the animals are being slaughtered right there on the table. And, it's normal and it's natural and it's beautiful, but it's also very unusual for us as Americans, where we get our meat in cellophane, and we're disassociated from the whole piece of it.
And that market's probably a couple hundred years old, if not older.
Oh, and it was meandering. It was miles of stalls, and that you would just meander through, and shanties that are covered with tin, and you're just walking past all kinds of things. And the funny thing is, it was a little overwhelming for me, but then my son went back the next day by himself and just walked around through the market. But you had to go way out of your way. Like, we were not in the part of town that, in fact, one of our cab drivers in Cartagena was like, I'm not going to that market. So it was, but we got there because of Anthony Bourdain, and because he'd covered it. I wouldn't have known.
Has your son picked up your love of food and
I think
culture?
So. Yeah, I think so. He spent a summer in Tokyo last summer, and he's saying when he graduates, he wants to just get a plane ticket and land somewhere in the world and just make his way through by odd jobs and see what he learns.
It's the time to do it.
It's yes, it is the time to do it. So I hope he does.
So what was your next happy accident?
So I'm back in Chattanooga, and I'm newly married, and I'm an empty nester, and I'm in this new city, and
that's a pretty big life change for you.
I do it all in big chunks. I feel like I've just got to do all my change at once. And so, and I'm not doing anything, right? I've sold my business, and I've just come off this, wonderful trip, and I'm walking around. We're on the south side. I'm walking around downtown, and I kept several times walked past the Edney Innovation Center. Innovation's a word that I really like. And I'm like, I wonder what they're innovating in there. And in fact, I called the number a couple of times, and it was a real estate number, right? They're selling office space in the Edney. And then I found out about CoLab, and then they had a CEO search. And I thought, well, I've only and ever been building businesses in primarily two different sectors. Wouldn't that be fun to help other people build their business? So I put my name in the hat for that, and that's, accidentally walking past this place, and here I am 2 years later, leading this wonderful group with a beautiful team and a really cool city.
And if you can, talk about that process a little bit, because CoLab was one of the early entrepreneurial support organizations in town.
Yeah. I mean, the way I hear it, Mike, they were the first, right? They started that movement, really. And it started with Create Here.
I remember that.
Yeah. And then CoLab took their 501c3 and started the organization. And so fast forward to where I'm entering the picture and doing my due diligence, and the board's doing their due diligence on me, and I'm asking around a lot. And what do you think of CoLab? Called the mayor. You don't know me, but tell me about CoLab. Just trying to figure out. But so now there are probably half a dozen or more organizations that support entrepreneurs. And so really CoLab was trying to figure out where's our lane? What lane do we occupy? How do we own that? And how do we distinguish ourselves from all the other organizations that are doing, in a lot of cases, a lot of the same things? Now, there's some differentiators, like Proof is very focused, right? They're on CPG and on restaurants, and you've got Launch Chattanooga with the kitchen. But by and large, I have this made up scale for entrepreneurs or for businesses, and it's 0 to 10. And 0 is idea on the back of the napkin, and 10 is, let's just say I'm STEAM, and I'm graduated out of that as a startup. Most of the activity was focused on the 0 to 2. So ideation to business creation. And CoLab was we want to focus on scalable businesses. And I kind of put that on my scales 3 to 5. So I've got a team in place. I'm incorporated. I've got sales. At least I have a minimal viable product in MVP, and I'm ready to start scaling the business. So that's where we started looking around, but yeah, we did. I think CoLab was the first, and then the ecosystem now is very rich. So
when it started, CoLab was more focused on that 1 and 2.
Yeah, I would say the 0 to 2 for sure. 0 to 2. But there was a wonderful relationship with EPB, and so at the time with the gig, and that was some focus on scalable businesses. How do we get tech businesses to Chattanooga? And if they had a gig speed internet, what would you do with it? Come to Chattanooga and tell us what you do with it. So there was some very successful reverse pitches and
I remember those,
invitations to Chattanooga, and how would you build a business? And that was not, I've got an existing business, but I've got an idea, right? How do I take that? In fact, they had some fun success with some of that, like a hackathon. There was a business that was created out of a weekend hackathon and then sold like a year later. So, that's the way I hear the stories is there was just a ton of excitement about what you can do in Chattanooga and what the resources are, and how do we market the city as a place to build your business.
I think when EPB launched the gig, it was EPB, it was CoLab, it was everyone coming together to say, as you said, what do we do with this? And to be able to market the gig like that, and to have those pitch fest, for lack of a better term, of everyone coming in and pitching their idea, really, I think it generated more ideas than people thought it would.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it was I don't know if you know Charlie Brock, but he was my board chair and who hired me and gave a presentation, and he talked about that as the first wave, right? So there was just all kinds of activity and what was happening with all the excitement around entrepreneurialism and the invitations here and all the support for entrepreneurs. And then talks about there was the kind of a dip, which was around COVID. And then, what do we do with the second wave, and how do we take what we've, from the first wave, how do we take that and build on that? And that resonated with me, even though I wasn't here for that experience of that first wave. But a lot happened.
In your career, you worked initially kind of in the corporate space. Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
And then you got out on your own as an entrepreneur with Belle Chevre. What do you consider yourself more?
Well, so even in the corporate space, they were all startups and very fast, high growth startups. So we went from, I think, Point Roll went from 40 to 400 in like 8 months. I mean, and then was, acquired 4 months later, right? So you were really as a startup, not as a stoic Gannett. Yeah. Oh, no. So Gannett acquired the startup that I was with, right? And I always had the reputation too, Mike, of leaving after the acquisition, because then I don't want the sort of stayed.
That doesn't seem routine. To be your personality.
No. I'm a great starter. I'm not a great finisher, which is, if you ask me to maintain programs that have been going for 20 years and don't have any change, I'm not your gal. But if you ask me to start something, then I've got a lot of enthusiasm for that. But selling, even in Belle Chevre, I was selling to consumers, but really I'm selling to the corporations that have the access to the consumers. So I'd probably put myself more in I understand corporations with innovation.
You understand the importance of change and taking advantage of those things, and that's where the innovation is.
Yeah. Yeah. And, everybody knows poor Blockbuster, right? Everybody knows that story, and you don't want to be that, right? But there's lots of examples of organizations that do not innovate. And what we talked about in the space is innovate or die, right? And I took that mindset into Belle Chevre, into a very traditional food, right? An artisan cheese, or just even like a really, again, an ancient process, and took that innovation into that space.
What's interesting about, like the cheese example, goat cheese has been around for centuries upon centuries and centuries.
Yeah.
But you're able to make it cool again.
Yeah.
People rediscover it.
Yeah. Or we discover it maybe for the first time here, right? Like there was, if you're in France, there's a cheese, fromage blanc, and it's, you have it for breakfast. I mean, so you'd stir, it's a wetter cheese, almost like a cottage cheese, but you'd stir in some fruit and you'd have that for breakfast. We launched a line of breakfast cheeses with the fromage blanc as the base. So a honey breakfast cheese and a fig breakfast cheese. I mean, so it's really just taking what has always been here and then making that relevant to today's market. And I would say that's the same thing that happened with the internet. It's just where our eyeballs go, right? It's just a different platform for the same thing. We're disseminating information in the same way that we've done it, whether we were standing on a corner, putting it in a newspaper, putting it on a tube that you watch but it's so interesting because we talk about, now that I'm thinking about this chain, it's like innovation's in there, but we're really not doing anything new.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because when my wife and I, either in the evening or on the weekend, we're sitting on our screened-in porch, and she gets upset because I'm on my phone and she's on her phone and we're scrolling. And I finally said, it's no different than if we're sitting around with the New York Times and looking at it that way. It's the same thing.
That's exactly what my husband says. He's like, if this was 20 years ago or whatever, we'd have newspapers in our hands instead of our phones. I would say we have our phones in our hands more than we have newspapers, but
they fit better.
But they fit better. But you're exactly right. We're looking for information, and what a wonderful place to be where we can have all this information
at our fingertips, literally,
or not even at our fingertips. Siri and Alexa are my best friends. I mean, like, I don't want to I'm too lazy to type anymore to ask the question.
See, I never think to use that. I'm sitting here and I'm an index finger typer, and I'm doing that, and it takes me a half hour, and by then it's like, my daughters will say, Dad, I already got it.
Yeah. No, I can't wait for AI on Alexa when I can just ask her anything.
So a lot of your career is innovation. How do you take that innovation into a place like CoLab at this point? How do you innovate an organization that caters to innovators?
Yeah. That's, I love that. Innovation for innovators. I might play with that a little bit, Mike. But the question I asked myself when we first got here, so the board said, we really want to focus on scalable businesses. And so I thought, how do we not even have to ask that question? Like, what kinds of things do we do that are automatically scalable, right? So I asked for 100 days. Give me 100 days to get my feet under me and understand the culture and what we have. And I did that primarily with the lens of, if there's a CoLab or 3 in every city in America, and there is, why would anyone come to CoLab, and why would anyone come to Chattanooga? What do we have that's distinctive from Atlanta or Nashville or Memphis or Silicon Valley or Boston, right? Pick a city. What do we do well? We talked about my hometown of Huntsville. If anyone knows Huntsville, they know what it's known for, right? What is it that we do well? Well, we do a lot of things well in Chattanooga. But what I started really sniffing out is, Steve Case had called us the Silicon Valley of freight, and we've got
logistics.
This really fascinating, logistics, supply chain. And they had this phenomenally, institution that's focused on energy, like a power board that's innovative. Like, I was like, I didn't like, that's an oxymoron, right? And then, TVA in our backyard, we've got battery tech companies, we've got a global OEM focused on electric vehicle production here. And so all of those things in aggregate added up to, we have something incredibly distinctive about how we're handling not just transportation, but I would say mobility in general, right? So logistics, supply chain, electrification, we have the largest urban test bed for connected autonomous vehicles in Chattanooga. And I find that surprisingly, most people in Chattanooga don't know about this. I mean, it is world renowned. Like, the Dr. Sotheby's who runs that and heads that research is the top in her field. And so,
and where is that being done?
That's on MLK. It's called the Smart Corridor. So there will be 80 plus intersections that are part of this Smart Corridor. And it's for things like, how does my car talk to your car, talk to my phone, talk to my bicycle, talk to the street light, talk to the signal. If I'm in a if I'm in a wheelchair and I need extra time crossing the street, can my light be dynamic so that it accommodates that for me? So with all of these things, again, in aggregate, we put together a program that we're calling sustainable mobility. And we define that as the future forward movement of people. So people movement, goods, supply chain, goods movement, data movement, and energy, right? So you need energy and data to get to the future forward movement of people and goods. We happen to have EPB, who just announced their, the first commercially available quantum network. It's just fascinating to me that we have all of these resources. And those are resources that we can attract talent and startups to come here and test their businesses and build their businesses on. So I pitched that idea to the board and they said, run with it. And that's what we're doing.
It's really a bit of a sea change in terms of being that focused for CoLab.
It is.
As opposed to
being a generalist.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we've sort of been a generalist. But again, if you think about when we were the only kid on the block, that made sense.
Yeah, you had to be almost.
Yeah. And so with the different organizations that are here and some that have focus, we have decided that we're going to head on our programs anyway. Our programmatic focus is on sustainable mobility. We still have tools for business from ideation to business creation too, and we're leaning into those. But on our program side, we're focused on what we believe very strongly is Chattanooga's competitive advantage.
That's not only interesting; it's well put. I'm just trying to absorb it all. It's a lot to take, and I've been in town for 25 years and do not know or appreciate the number of advantages that we have that I'm sure the average person doesn't.
No, but we're out as an organization. I was going to say, standing on the rooftop sort of preaching, but this is sort of the gospel. And so our first program that we opened up, Mike, we had 145 applications from 30 different countries to come here and to work with EPB and TVA and the Smart Corridor and Volkswagen and the Battery Lab and otherwise, because what we're doing is we're marketing the city as one of the top 3 to 5 cities in the world if you're building a business in this space. If you are working on electric vehicles or autonomous vehicles or charging infrastructure or the energy transition, that we believe Chattanooga has something extraordinary to offer companies in that space.
You talk about the Smart Corridor and lights talking to cars talking to bikes and so on. How important is this focus to our growth as a city? We're growing fairly rapidly, not as rapid as other places, but I'm talking more smart growth to be able to address these transportation issues and logistics issues and smart growth issues.
Yeah, and we don't want to end up like some of our neighbors, on both sides of us, right, who have major traffic problems.
Exactly.
And how do we do that where the infrastructure is already baked in? So I took a tour of a lab in a small city, and they're focused on innovation around very similar things, but they've set up infrastructure. They have dedicated lanes for autonomous vehicles. They have dedicated resources for entrepreneurs to build their business there. But the infrastructure has to be there so that you can allow a startup to come in and test. And I would say that the city is very open to becoming, not open, eager to be a smart city and all of that and all that entails, right? So there's a lot that goes into what does it mean to be a smart city. But in terms of movement, people movement and goods movement, I do think we have an advantage.
Have you been surprised by what you found since you've been here?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. What's so funny is where we landed in terms of, this programmatic focus on sustainable mobility. I was really reticent to talk to the freight industry because I thought there's nothing sexy about freight, right? Like it's an old industry that doesn't have, and I was so wrong. Like I actually got taken by, a well-known freight family to this freight conference in Las Vegas as I'm sort of fettering all this out. And autonomous transportation is further down the road on freight than it is on, and I had no idea. Like I literally had no idea. So I learned, and there's so much tech happening there. And if we really are the Silicon Valley of freight, then let's then let's get the capital so we can look like Silicon Valley. Let's have some exits. Let's have more growth and focus on those businesses so that we can focus on what we do well. So yeah, I was surprised. I had no idea.
I think we have a new slogan for Craig Fuller over at Freight Waves, putting the sexy back in freight.
Yeah, yeah, there you go. Yeah,
really do. Have you seen the podcast "What the Truck"?
Yeah.
With Tim Dillon.
Yeah. And
I mean, they take freight and they make it interesting.
Yeah, and Craig and Eric were very influential for me. And Craig was one of the last people that I talked to in sort of this discovery phase I was in, and he was so passionate about all of it. And look at all this stuff that we had. And I'm like, why didn't I start here? But it happened the way it needed to happen. And so I'm very grateful to Craig. And then Eric, who's the CEO of US Express, came on as our executive in residence and is also now on our board. And so we're put all the pieces of this puzzle together. Again, it seems sort of disjointed, but it's not. And we do need to bring some of this a little tighter together.
But to your point, they're happy accidents. And it's not so much this overall plan of we're going to go out and do this, and this. It's the things that have come your way throughout your career that you've been able to look at and take advantage of.
I think so. And I think part of it is just sort of being open to something that's totally different, right? I mean, and having the great good fortune to be surrounded by people who will say, okay, Tasia, go do it.
Yeah.
Let's go see what you can do. And being supported by people who, it's without it. And again, that's the role that we play at CoLab. We are that group of people that will support those endeavors. Entrepreneurs are my favorite people on the planet. They're crazy enough to go do something despite the overwhelming odds of failure, and they do it anyway. And I love those people.
Got a couple more questions for you. What do you want or expect to see out of Chattanooga in the next 10 years?
I want to see us be what I just said that we are. One of 3 cities in America.
And who are those competitors?
I mean, if you look in Western Europe, there's a lot of this going on, right? And they're ahead of the game with us on electrification and automation and some of the tech and smart city stuff. But they're also more pedestrian oriented. We're a huge country and we're spread out and we like our room. And but yeah, so one city that's doing Northwest Arkansas is doing a good job. They've got Walmart there. I mean, talk about supply chain.
Bentonville,
They're doing a really great job. Austin's doing a good job. In fact, I hate to say this, but Volkswagen is testing their autonomous vehicles in Austin and not on our smart corridor, but we'll change that. That's hopefully. And what's happening in terms of, autonomous freight and movement of goods, Texas is, in general, is very open to those kinds of things. The thing that, when I talk about this program, Sustainable Mobility Program, there's 3 legs to that stool, right? So the first leg and most important is support for the entrepreneur and the founder. The second is support for our corporate partners. What we really want to be able to do is that we want to attract innovators here that are solving problems for TVA and that are solving problems for EPB. Problems that they're already trying to sort out, maybe internally, but looking outside to, innovators to bring that in. And the third is that there's a benefit back to the community. So in that picture in my mind, what if we had an autonomous route to get workers to Volkswagen from a neighborhood that might have transportation insecurity, right? What if we can eat our own lunch and utilize that technology so that we are this space that has cutting edge technology that helps lift people up that need that too. So it
also serves as a proving ground.
100%.
Going to get to the last question. But I want to remind our listeners who makes all this possible. Thank the Tennessee Valley Authority for sponsoring My Morning Cup. You can follow TVA on social media to learn more about its multifaceted mission of service and visit TVA.com/do-good-here to explore exciting TVA career opportunities. All right, last question for you. What would you tell your 25-year-old self is important for a happy life?
I would tell her that it's okay to slow down. And I don't think she'd listen, because I think if I told myself that, I wouldn't listen either. But I do feel like as I've gotten older, adopting some practices like meditation and journaling. I've journaled since I was a teenager, but just some time for reflection, and you don't have to get it all done in 2 days. But I still feel that way.
Well, and the sad truth is, I'm 62, and people who have been 62 have been telling those who are 25 for centuries upon centuries, what they should do. And we never really listen when we're 25 because we're on a mission.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's so much to explore, and there's so much to do. And so I don't think if I told my 53-year-old self to do that she'd really listen. She'd probably nod and and maybe listen a little bit more. But yeah, that's a life lesson for me. But I still feel like I'm 25 and there's lots to explore.
Well, that brings up my favorite Satchel Paige quote was, how old would you be if you didn't know how old you were? It's all about what's in your mind.
Yeah. Yeah. And the mind is a powerful tool.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you were here. I really enjoyed getting to know you better, and glad you're in Chattanooga.
Thank you so much. I enjoyed it too, Mike.
Thanks for listening to My Morning Cup, a podcast by Costa Media Advisors. If you liked this episode, please share it with a friend. I release a new episode each week, so be sure to subscribe on Spotify, Apple, Google, or wherever you listen to podcasts.